In this video, we're going to be talking about defining your Instagram strategy. Before we do that, I wanted to quickly revisit the different content sources, created content, curated content, and co-created content. Because for more than any other social media platform out there, it's important that you are constantly thinking about where are you going to source your content from. Created content in the context of Instagram is any original content that you create, whether that's for your feed, for stories, for reels, for IGTV. And this is pretty much the most common source of content that you're going to see on Instagram. And it can include content that you contracted someone else to create for you, or it can be stock images that you edit ever so slightly with a bit of text or a filter or elements. Okay, and there's a couple of examples here on the screen showing you this, where people have taken images and then put it together, probably in Canva, just to make something that is deemed as created content. The second is curated content, and this one's important because in the context of Instagram, there is no native share button. Unlike Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter with its retweet and so forth, there's no button to share a piece of content to all of your followers. You can share them in direct messages, or you can share, if you're tagged, for example, you can share it to stories, but there's no kind of native share to share it to all of your followers. But that being said, there's a lot of reposting and regramming that occurs on Instagram. In fact, it's pretty prolific on the social media platform. Now, this can be done through a third-party app like the Repost for Instagram app, or you can take a screenshot of the content if it's a static image. Obviously, you can't do that for video. And then you can share the content to your account. Now, technically, it's not allowed by Instagram, but as I mentioned, it is very commonplace. In fact, most people won't actually mind if you repost their content as long as you mention them. And this is because the mention because if you include their account name in your caption, that mention will grow awareness of the original content creator's account. And that mention is also a clickable link that will drive traffic through to their profile, which will increase followers and also increase bio links on their single URL that they have on their bio. There are many examples, a few up here on the screen, of Instagram accounts that actually use 100% curated content. For example, here, Sationists, they regram sort of tasty and eye-watering vegan food from other posts that they find on Instagram, but they always ensure that they cite the source account in the caption. Another one is Surf Daily, and they have a 100% regram strategy as well. They create these kind of curate, I should say, amazing photographs and videos from all around the world of people surfing. Now, the great thing about curating content on Instagram is that you can see how much engagement the content originally received. And this is going to be a really, really good proxy for how much engagement you're likely to get when you repost it. Just a note though, if you decide this, you should never, ever pretend like the content is yours. That is clear copyright breach. You should always mention the content creator. And you will find occasionally that if you're doing this, some of the original content creators will actually reach out to you, and despite the fact that you're promoting their account, they will say, hey, I would like you to take that post down. And if that occurs, you should do it straight away. But remember, technically, it is against Instagram's rules. So you need to decide for yourself where you sit on the balance of risk with that, because at the extreme end, if Instagram does decide that it doesn't like what you're doing, then they could potentially take your content down. But again, if you just browse through Instagram, you'll see how prolific it is. Just a final note is that if you take an image from a stock site, you don't have to provide credit to, it's nice to, but you don't have to provide credit to the original content creator. The other thing to consider when it comes to curating content, or really just as a content source potentially for some of your created content, is thinking about your suppliers. So particularly if you have a tangible product, suppliers can be a fantastic way in which you can source content that you can share on your Instagram account. So here you've got a few examples from HypeDC. They're a retail and online shoe store, and they posted a picture of one of their suppliers from Vans, and you see that in the caption they actually mention Vans Australia. Similarly, Sunglass Hut, they're using this for Instagram shopping, but they also, in the caption, you can't see it there, will actually mention the brand Persol that is in the particular image. And the reason why it's important to think about your supplier content is because you can get access to a huge amount of great high quality content without ever having to create any of it yourself. So let's look at an example of, say, a retail bike store that sells 20 different bike brands. If they reached out to those 20 different bike brands and asked the suppliers to give them the 20 best images for the bike, which they've probably already given to this particular retail store that sells bikes, or maybe it's an online store as well. But they've probably already given some for the website. But if they said, hey, have you got a bank of content that we can pull from, and each one of those suppliers provides 20 images, maybe some videos as well, for the bikes, and then the suppliers agree that those images can be shared on Instagram, then that's going to provide this particular Instagram account with 400 Instagram posts or 13 months worth of content if you're posting once a day. Okay, so this is the power of supply content. It doesn't necessarily have to be suppliers as well. It could be partners, could be associations, could be customers, right? So always be thinking about what are the content, the pools of content that you could potentially access to share on your Instagram account. And then finally, co-created content. Now, we've already been through this, but I wanted to quickly revisit co-created content because on Instagram, it's probably the most used on Instagram. So you can partner with influencers, and this is where you can, either through Facebook's Brand Collabs Manager or through one of the third-party influencer platforms like Tribe or The Right Fit, find influencers and then work with them, pay them to create content for you. And so this is the first form of co-created content, sometimes referred to as commissioned content. And in this particular instance, there's going to be a brand or a product that you would like the influencer to talk about and create some content, and they're going to create a bunch of static images or videos or a combination of the two. And typically, this is where they will share that content to their account to obviously grow awareness of that brand or product, or you as the brand that has engaged them will share that content to your Instagram account as well, and that's why it's kind of called co-created. So there's an example here, which is influencer Helen Owen, and she's working with the Four Seasons Resort in Costa Rica. And you can see that it says paid partnership up the top there, so that you know that this has been done through Facebook Brand Collabs Manager. So Helen Owen would create the content. However, it's ultimately being driven by the paid campaign that was commissioned by the Four Seasons Resort in Costa Rica. Now, that resort will also share the same image to their accounts and mention Helen Owen, and Helen Owen, when she shares it, she will mention the resort. And so this is a form of collaboration, but essentially it's paid. The second type of co-created content is user-generated content, and this is where you employ tactics or basically incentivize your network of followers or people, not even people that don't necessarily follow you, to make content for you. And if you're a large enough Instagram account, the incentive can just be the fact that you're going to share the content. And the example we always love using is the Ad Australia account. So Ad Australia does not create any of its own content. It has millions and millions of followers. And what it asks its audience to do is to mention or photo tag Ad Australia for their chance to get reposted or regrabbed. And in doing so, because the Ad Australia account has so many millions of followers, anyone who has their content reposted by Ad Australia is likely to receive massive brand awareness, huge number of profile visits, and a massive spike in followers. In fact, I had an actual friend of mine who went down to the Figure Eight pools in Sydney, in one of the national parks here in Sydney, and he just got a very lucky photo of this massive wave crashing behind in front of the Figure Eight pools. He tagged Ad Australia, and he went from one day having 4,000 followers to the next day having about 11,000 in the space of 24 hours, just because the Ad Australia account shared his particular post. So that's the power of user-generated content. Now, as a strategy, it's unbelievable because A, you don't have to create any of your own content. B, the people that are wanting you to repost the content, they're promoting your account. So everyone that wants to get reposted by Ad Australia is tagging and mentioning Ad Australia, which in turn increases the number of people that follow the Ad Australia account. And then in addition to that, those people, those posts that they do share, Ad Australia is building a really, really strong relationship with, by essentially rewarding content creators by reposting their content. So if you can get this going, it's just amazing. You get this great access to free content, and you get a huge amount of awareness, free awareness for your account. But if you have a smaller Instagram account, people won't necessarily do that, right? So you're going to have to come up with some other incentive that encourages them to create content. And you see, I saw one recently from Deliveroo where they're wanting people to share posts, and the reward was, $5 off their next delivery. So there's all types of incentives that you can put in place, and you can put criteria around that, which is that they have to mention you in the caption or, tag you, provide a photo tag to motivate them to create the content on your behalf. Okay, so we're going to be defining your Instagram strategy for your profile. That is the content that's going to display permanently on your main grid. And this is a little 3x3 icon that you can click on here that everyone looks at. This is the grid that everyone looks at before considering whether or not to follow your account. Now, if you're posting Reels and you're posting IGTV videos, you will see additional icons appear. That is, you'll have a Reels grid and you'll also have an IGTV videos grid, but the main grid is the one that everyone looks at. Now, remember that you can share your IGTV videos over to your profile so that they appear in the feed. And similarly, you can also share your Reels over to the profile. Any live broadcast can be recorded and on as IGTV videos, which then can also be shared over to your profile and appear in the feed. And there's really no reason not to do this. It's by sharing it over to your profile so that it appears in the feed, it's going to garner more engagement because the content is just seen by more people. And it also means that you're maximizing efficiency. You're putting it in more locations and not just having it restricted to that one particular placement, like just to Reels or just to IGTV videos. In terms of the content topics that we share, that is what our content's about. We want to make sure that the content that we share to the feed posts, Reels or IGTV videos is really about them. And what we mean by that is that you're adding as much value as possible, thinking about things like how-to guides, listicles, industry news, trends, opinion pieces, compilations, summaries, etc. Right? Think about what your content can be about that will ultimately educate, entertain, or inspire your audience. Now, all of these feed posts, Reels, IGTV videos, they can also be shared to stories. And again, there's no reason for you not to be doing this because it's just additional placement, additional reach, more eyeballs that you're going to get to see your particular content. And of course, it disappears after 24 hours. Plus, you can also use content topics that are about you, i.e. things like social proof, case studies, testimonials, company news, company announcements, answers to frequently asked questions about your product reviews, and so on, and share this to stories as well. So stories is definitely a placement where you can be more promotional in nature. Stories ideally is people get pulled into them once they've already followed your account, okay? And if they're following your account, they're seeing the value that you're adding with your posts, your Reels, and your IGTV videos, then there's no reason why you can't start to integrate promotional type of content topics into stories because they're only going to last for 24 hours. Just don't overdo it. There's always got to be a nice balance between value-adding content and also the promotional type of content that you'll be sharing through to stories. Just make sure, though, that you tell a story. Right? There's a reason why it's called stories, and that's because you want to have a sequence of content that takes people on a journey, right? So don't just have one particular thing. Try and always have 3 stories, one after the other, that kind of takes people on a little bit of a journey. Even if you are talking about some awards that you won or a media publication that you were just featured on, tell them the story of how you were able to get that media publication, and that's going to draw the audience in and get them to know you a lot better as a result. Okay, so let's revisit the organic content strategy for the villa in Bali called Sungai Tinggi. If you recall, they decided they wanted to have an active presence across both Facebook and Instagram. And originally for Instagram, they wanted to share content twice a day, but they learned a little bit more about Instagram, in particular the organic reach that you can get from Reels, and therefore they actually decided to pull back on the frequency. They've reduced it down to a daily frequency. They've also added in co-created content. So they've thought about how can they potentially compel people that stay at the villa to create content for them and share it to their Instagram accounts, and then how can they repost that content over to their Instagram profile. And this is really, really important. You know, your organic content strategy is not set in stone, and you should be constantly looking for ways in which you can optimize it once you learn about new tactics. The other thing is that they're about the villa content. They are, I've added in a row down here. They're going to be, sharing that content across their feed posts, across Reels and IGTV. And anytime they do that, it's always going to be shared to the feed so that it appears permanently on the profile. But they're also going to share this to stories because it's additional reach that they can garner by sharing feed posts, Reels, and IGTV videos to stories. For the Villa promotions, they've decided that the best place for this is in stories, and they don't want to ruin their beautiful grid, and so any promotions that they do will always be in stories. And then finally, their influencer campaigns, pretty fluid. They're going to decide at the time. Could be Reels, could be IGTV videos, could be feed posts according to, what type of content that they're, producing with the influencer. Now, in order to get a nice looking grid, Sungguh Tinggi, the Villa, decide to alternate between 3 different types of images under that kind of about the Villa theme. So they might be looking at Villa interiors and exteriors. Villa sunsets, so that they see that as a real selling point of the Villa, so they decide to have a kind of mini subset of the theme under Villa sunsets. And then finally, one around Villa activities and events, such as weddings or massages or tours or surfing on that type of thing. So by alternating between these themes, which, as I mentioned, are sort of like essentially subtopics from within your theme, what it will do is it'll maintain this kind of nice grid layout. Okay, so where you've got 3 different columns kind of in a theme, and then you can always use Canva to add these kind of stencils over the top and potentially the logo that you want to share on top of that. But let's look at another example, but in reverse. So Rupi Kaur is an influencer with about, I think, over 4 million followers, and she uses a tile strategy. And when you're using a tile strategy, instead of having 3 different posts that you alternate between to get those columns, what you're doing with a tile strategy, you're actually alternating between 2 different types of posts. And she has 2 core themes. The first is poetry. She's a very well-known poet, and she uses simple text and always on a white background, sometimes with one of these little sketches that she has. And then the second post is content about her photo shoots or videos from her live performances, live content that she does, that's shared to IGTV, any media features that she's on, but it's always about her as an influencer. So this is a pretty simple strategy to create a very visually appealing grid, but at the same time it gives Rupi the flexibility to share quite a variety of content. And if you notice in this particular screenshot that she is kind of leveraging all the different placements. You can see here she's using IGTV. She's using IGTV there as well. She's got Reels here. She's got multi-photo posts. She's got videos that she's just shared to her feed posts. She's got static images. Right? In the end, it really doesn't matter what format that these posts are in. What matters is that it looks nice on the grid. So the best way for you to come up with your grid strategy is to go to Instagram, find some grids that you like, take some screenshots, and then just jump into Canva or use PowerPoint as we've done and design it. And don't overcomplicate it. Your either recommendation with getting a nice grid is kind of work to a 2-post strategy like Rupi Kaur has done here with hers, or a 3-post strategy which will give you those 3 columns, and every time you post something new, the columns will just shift over one each time. And by planning your grid in advance like this, what it's going to help you to identify is the volume of content that you need to create in bulk. So if you're looking at a strategy where, in this case, where Sungguh Tinggi wants to share 1 post per day, then that's going to be 30 per month, obviously, or 900 per quarter. So they're thinking about how do we create 3 months worth of content all at once. So in order to do that, they might say, well, if we're going this column strategy where we're alternating between 3 different types of posts, that's going to be 30 villa and interiors and exteriors, 30 villa sunsets, and then 30 villa activities. And they're able to engage a professional photographer or videographer to come in and shoot a sufficient amount of content in order for them to be able to bulk produce their content and schedule all of that 3 months in advance. Now, then it's really up to you to decide, are half of those reels, like is every second one you see here, are they going to use every second one as a reel? And then maybe they'll do 30 that are single image. They might do 10 that are carousels, multiple photos, and maybe 5 IGTVs. So from there, it's really up to you to break down each one of these and say, okay, which ones are going to be reels and which ones are going to be IGTV or multi-photo. And then ideally, if you're doing this, what you should find that your grid for your reels grid, but also your IGTV grid will also have a nice aesthetic appeal because you're producing similar types of content for them as well. Now, the next thing for Sungai Tinggi to decide is the placements. And here they decide that, half of everything that gets shared over to the profile that appears in the feed is going to be a reel. So every second one, you can see the little icon here that's going to appear on their main grid on their profile. They might then decide 30 are single image, 10 are these kind of multi-photo or carousels, and then finally they're going to create 5 IGTV, which is these little icons here. Okay, so it's really up to you to decide what type of content format you want to use, whether it's a feed post and if it's on the feed post, whether it's single image or multi-photo or a video. Is it going to be a reel? Is it going to be an IGTV video? And by at least always sharing them across to your profile, you're going to have a presence across each one of those placements. You're going to have a nice main grid. You're going to have a nice IGTV videos grid, and you're also going to have a reels grid as well, and ideally making the most of the additional organic reach that's being offered currently by reels.